When we think of the legend of Zelda, our minds immediately conjure images of Link, the hero clad in green, sword in hand, embarking on epic quests to save Princess Zelda and defeat the forces of evil. We remember the dungeons conquered, the puzzles solved, the bosses vanquished. But what about those who aren't chosen by destiny? What about the ordinary people who call Hyrule home, who wake each morning not to adventure, but to the mundane realities of survival, work, and community? These are the villagers of Hyrule, and their stories, though quieter than the heroes, are no less compelling. Throughout the many iterations of Hyrule across different games and timelines, one constant remains: the villages that dot the landscape, providing bastions of civilization in a world perpetually threatened by darkness. From the medieval-inspired Kakariko village to the coastal beauty of Lurelin, from the mountain-dwelling Gorons to the desert Gerudo, each settlement tells a story of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring human spirit. Or perhaps more accurately, the enduring spirit of all the diverse races that inhabit this fantasy realm. The life of an ordinary villager in Hyrule is shaped by forces both seen and unseen. There's the ever-present threat of monsters lurking just beyond the village boundaries, the economic realities of trade and commerce in a world where gemstones serve as currency, the social structures that bind communities together, and the spiritual traditions that give meaning to existence. There's also the shadow of history, for Hyrule is a land where great calamities have repeatedly reshaped civilization, forcing survivors to rebuild from the ashes time and again. In Breath of the Wild, we witness Hyrule a century after its greatest catastrophe, where the great calamity reduced a once mighty kingdom to scattered settlements clinging to survival. The ruins that litter the landscape speak of a grander past, and the few villages that remain stand as testaments to the determination of those who refuse to surrender to despair. In earlier games like Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess, we see Hyrule in different states of stability, where village life takes on different rhythms, different challenges, different joys. What does it mean to be an ordinary villager in such a world? How do you raise crops when monsters might raid your fields? How do you conduct trade when the roads are perilous? How do you maintain faith in benevolent goddesses when darkness threatens to consume everything? How do you build a home, raise a family, pursue simple happiness in a kingdom where apocalypse seems always to loom on the horizon? These are the questions we'll explore as we delve deep into the daily realities of Hyrulean village life. We'll walk through the morning routines of farmers tending their fields, the careful negotiations of merchants trying to turn a profit, the prayers offered at goddess statues seeking divine protection. We'll examine the architecture that shelters these communities, influenced by medieval European, Japanese, and various other cultural traditions. We'll witness how wars and calamities reshape entire societies, forcing adaptations that echo through generations. And we'll discover that even in a world of magic, monsters, and heroes, the most fundamental aspects of life, community, family, work, and hope, remain remarkably human. Daily life and occupations in Hyrulean villages. When dawn breaks over a typical Hyrulean village, life stirs with a rhythm that has been repeated for generations, perhaps even centuries. The daily existence of ordinary villagers is marked not by grand adventures, but by the steady, reliable work that keeps their communities functioning. These are people who understand that civilization is built not through heroic deeds alone, but through the accumulated effort of countless ordinary days. In villages like Hateno in Breath of the Wild, mornings begin early. Farmers rise before the sun fully crests the horizon, checking on their livestock and preparing for a day of agricultural labor. The Hateno cows need tending, their milk a valuable commodity that helps sustain the village economy. The fields require constant attention, whether it's planting, weeding, watering, or harvesting. In a world without modern conveniences, every task demands physical labor and careful timing with the seasons. A farmer in Hyrule cannot simply ignore their crops for days to go on an adventure. The wheat will not harvest itself, the pumpkins will not grow without care, and a missed planting season could mean hardship through the coming winter. The occupations available to Hyrulean villagers vary by location and the resources available in their region, but certain roles appear consistently across different settlements. Every substantial village needs farmers to produce food, merchants to facilitate trade, innkeepers to provide lodging for travelers, and craftspeople to create the tools and goods necessary for daily life. In Kakariko village, we find dedicated potion makers and shopkeepers, while in Goron City, the economy revolves around mining and metalworking, with skilled Goron craftsmen extracting precious ores from the volcanic depths and forging them into valuable items. The fishing villages present their own unique lifestyle. Lurelin village in Breath of the Wild exemplifies this perfectly. Here, life revolves entirely around the sea. The men and women of Lurelin spend their days casting nets, manning boats, and bringing in catches that feed not only their own community, but can be traded to inland settlements. A fisherman's life is one of intimate knowledge of the ocean, understanding the tides, the weather patterns, the behaviors of fish, and the dangerous creatures that also inhabit the waters. When monsters establish camps on nearby beaches, as happens in Lurelin, it's not merely an inconvenience, but an existential threat to the community's primary means of survival. The division of labor in Hyrulean villages shows a society that, while medieval in many aspects, maintains surprising sophistication. Specialized craftspeople ply their trades, blacksmiths forge weapons and tools, tailors create and repair clothing, and dye shops allow villagers to customize their garments. In Hateno village specifically, we find one of the few remaining centers of ancient Shaker technology research, where scientists like Pura and Simon work to understand the remnants of a more advanced age. This suggests that even in the so-called simpler times of Hyrulean village life, there were always those dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and innovation. Children in Hyrulean villages don't simply play all day. In settlements like Hateno village in Tears of the Kingdom, we discover that education matters to these communities. A village school operates where children learn about history, including the traumatic events of the Great Calamity. Teachers like Simon work to ensure that younger generations understand where they came from and the challenges their ancestors overcame. This commitment to education reveals communities that think beyond mere survival, that value knowledge and the preservation of cultural memory. These children learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, foundational skills that prepare them for adult life in Hyrule, whether they become farmers, merchants, craftspeople, or scholars. The daily schedule of a typical villager is dictated by practical necessity and social custom. Most work during daylight hours, taking advantage of natural light to accomplish their tasks. As evening approaches, villagers return to their homes, gather at taverns or community spaces to socialize, share news, and maintain the social bonds that keep their communities cohesive. In Clocktown from Majora's Mask, we witness the most detailed depiction of villager schedules in the series. Each NPC follows a precise routine over the game's 3-day cycle, going to work, visiting shops, meeting friends, attending to personal matters. This level of detail reveals that Nintendo's developers understood that believable worlds require citizens who live actual lives, not just background decoration. Innkeepers play a crucial role in village economies and social structures. The inns scattered across Hyrule provide not just beds for weary travelers, but serve as information hubs where news and rumors circulate. An innkeeper hears stories from merchants traveling from distant lands, from treasure hunters who've explored forgotten ruins, from soldiers reporting on monster activity. This information flows through the community, shaping decisions about when to travel, which routes are safe, what opportunities might exist for trade or employment. For the modest price of 20 rupees, a traveler can secure a bed and a meal, but the true value of these establishments lies in their role as community gathering spaces. The daily life of Hyrulean villagers is also marked by constant awareness of danger. Living in a world where monsters roam freely means that even mundane activities carry risk. A merchant traveling between villages might be attacked by bokoblins or moblins on the road. A farmer working in fields near the village boundary might glimpse a Lionel in the distance and know that venturing further would mean almost certain death. Treasure hunters and adventurers, those villagers brave or foolish enough to explore beyond the relative safety of settlements, face even greater dangers. Yet these individuals persist because the potential rewards, ancient treasures, valuable materials, forgotten knowledge, can dramatically improve their circumstances. The women of Hyrulean villages often shoulder particularly heavy burdens. In Lurelin village, we meet Kiana, a mother too busy with daily errands and childcare to gather the ingredients needed to cook her family's favorite meal. This small detail speaks volumes about the realities of village life. There are no servants, no modern conveniences to ease domestic labor. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, and often contributing to the family's economic activities all fall on the shoulders of villagers, particularly women, who must somehow balance all these demands. The fact that Kiana dreams of making seafood paella for her family, but simply lacks the time, reveals both the aspirations for small joys and the harsh limitations of daily existence. Elderly villagers, no longer able to perform the most strenuous physical labor, often serve as sources of wisdom and keepers of tradition. In many villages, we encounter old men and women who share legends, offer advice, or simply watch the younger generations at work, their presence a living connection to the past. A retired fisherman like Roselle in Lurelin village spends his days staring at the sea, but he also preserves knowledge of sunken treasures and ancient legends. These elders represent the accumulated experience of lifetimes spent in these communities, and younger villagers who take time to listen often gain valuable insights. The concept of work-life balance, as we might understand it in modern terms, doesn't really exist for most Hyrulean villagers. Work is life, and life is work. Survival demands constant effort, and the line between labor and leisure blurs into a rhythm of necessary tasks, interspersed with social interactions and rest. A blacksmith doesn't clock out at 5 in the evening. A farmer doesn't have weekends off. The crops, the forge, the shop, these things demand attention according to their own schedules, not human convenience. Yet within this demanding existence, villagers find moments of joy, celebrate festivals, form friendships, fall in love, raise children, and create meaning in their lives despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges they face. The diversity of occupations across different Hyrulean races adds another layer of complexity to village life. The Gorons, with their natural affinity for heat and ability to consume rocks, dominate mining and metalworking industries. The Zora, equally at home in water as on land, naturally gravitate toward fishing, river navigation, and crafts involving aquatic materials. The Gerudo, desert dwellers with a culture that produces exclusively female children, have developed a society centered around warrior skills, gems trading, and desert survival techniques. The Raito, capable of flight, serve as messengers and scouts, their mobility allowing them to cover distances that would take land-bound races days or weeks. Each race's unique biology and cultural traditions shape the types of work they pursue and the communities they build. In the post-calamity world of Breath of the Wild, many traditional occupations have been lost or disrupted. The great castle town that once surrounded Hyrule Castle is now ruins inhabited only by guardians and monsters. The sophisticated infrastructure that once supported a thriving kingdom has crumbled. Yet in the surviving villages, we see not just persistence, but adaptation. Villagers have learned to make do with less, to be more self-sufficient, to forge new trade networks among the scattered settlements. The resilience of ordinary people shines through in how they've rebuilt semblances of normal life from the wreckage of catastrophe. The relationship between work and identity is particularly interesting in Hyrulean villages. Many NPCs are defined entirely by their occupation. They're not just people who happen to work as merchants or blacksmiths. They are merchants and blacksmiths. Their sense of self is intimately tied to their role in the community economy. This might seem limiting from a modern perspective, but it also suggests a society where purpose and contribution are clearly defined, where everyone knows their place in the social fabric and takes pride in fulfilling their responsibilities. A skilled craftsperson in Hyrule isn't merely earning a living. They're maintaining a tradition, serving their community, and creating things of value that will endure beyond their lifetime. The agricultural backbone, farming and food production. Agriculture forms the absolute foundation of life in Hyrule, the bedrock upon which all civilization in this fantasy kingdom rests. Without farms, there would be no villages, no cities, no culture to speak of. Every person who eats but doesn't farm relies entirely on those who do. In a medieval-style society without modern agricultural technology, the margin between adequate harvest and famine can be perilously thin, making farmers arguably the most important members of any Hyrulean community, even if they're rarely celebrated as heroes. The agricultural practices we observe across different Hyrulean villages reveal a deep understanding of sustainable farming adapted to local conditions. In Hateno village, one of the few Hylian settlements to survive the Great Calamity, relatively intact, extensive farmland surrounds the village proper. Fields of crops stretch across the gentle hills, tended by villagers who've maintained these agricultural traditions through generations of upheaval. The crops grown here include swift carrots, fortified pumpkins, and other varieties of produce that serve both nutritional needs and can be used in cooking recipes that provide various beneficial effects. In Tears of the Kingdom, Link gains the ability to assist with farming through a questline involving the Hateno village school. After completing specific educational quests for the teacher Simin, Link unlocks access to a small farming plot behind the school. Here, the NPC Uma teaches the basics of crop cultivation. The player can plant various seeds, pumpkins, tomatoes, wild berries, wheat, rice, carrots or melons, and return approximately 2 in-game days later, roughly 48 real-world minutes, to harvest the fully grown crops. This simple game mechanic reflects a profound truth about Hyrulean agriculture. Farming requires patience, planning, and a willingness to wait for nature to take its course. The crops available in Hyrule aren't merely decorative elements in the game world. They serve essential purposes in the cooking system that allows Link to prepare meals with various effects. But more importantly for ordinary villagers, these crops represent survival. A field of wheat means bread for the winter. A patch of pumpkins means nutritious food that can be stored for weeks. A plot of carrots provides variety in diet and can be fed to livestock or sold for income. The fact that Uma, an ordinary villager with no heroic destiny, tends this plot with such care and dedication exemplifies the mindset necessary for agricultural life in Hyrule. The challenges facing Hyrulean farmers are manifold and daunting. First and foremost is the ever-present threat of monster attacks. Fields located near village boundaries or along known monster routes face constant danger of being raided by bokoblins, moblins, or other hostile creatures. These monsters don't merely pose a threat to human life. They can destroy crops, kill livestock, and undo months of agricultural labor in a single raid. This reality means that farming in Hyrule often requires defensive thinking. Fields must be located where they can be protected, watches must be kept, and sometimes farmers themselves must be prepared to fight to defend their livelihood. Weather presents another significant challenge. Hyrulean farmers possess no modern weather prediction technology, no satellites to track approaching storms. They rely on traditional knowledge, observation of natural signs, and sometimes sheer luck. A late frost can devastate young plants. Too much rain can rot crops or wash away topsoil. Drought can wither entire fields. And in regions like Death Mountain, where volcanic activity creates extreme temperature variations, or in the Hebra Mountains where snow covers the ground most of the year, conventional agriculture becomes nearly impossible, forcing communities to rely on trade for their food needs. The division of agricultural labor in Hyrulean villages follows patterns we might recognize from medieval European or feudal Japanese societies that inspired much of the series' aesthetic. Extended families often work the same land together, with agricultural knowledge and techniques passed from parent to child through practical demonstration. Children grow up learning to identify different plants, understanding when to sow and when to reap, developing the physical stamina necessary for long days of fieldwork. This intergenerational transfer of knowledge ensures that farming practices remain consistent and that communities maintain food security even as individual farmers age or pass away. Livestock plays an essential role in Hyrulean agriculture. Cows provide milk, which appears in several games as a healing item and clearly serves as a dietary staple for villagers. Chickens, or cuckoos as they're known in Hyrule, provide eggs and meat, though anyone who's played a Zelda game knows that attacking cuckoos is inadvisable, as they'll summon their entire flock to retaliate with terrifying coordination. Goats also appear in some settlements, contributing milk and meat to village food supplies. The care of these animals represents a significant time investment. They must be fed, watered, sheltered, and protected from predators and monsters. Yet they provide reliable sources of protein and fat that crops alone cannot match. The seasonal nature of agriculture means that Hyrulean farming communities experience dramatic variations in workload throughout the year. Planting season demands intensive labor as fields must be prepared and seeds sown within relatively narrow time windows to maximize growing seasons. Summer months require constant attention to growing crops, weeding, watering when necessary, watching for pests and diseases. Harvest season brings another surge of intensive work, as crops must be gathered before weather turns or they rot in the field. Winter, depending on the region, might offer relative rest or present its own challenges of livestock care and preservation of stored foods. Food preservation represents a critical but often overlooked aspect of agricultural life in Hyrule. Without refrigeration, how do villagers ensure that harvest bounty extends through the lean months? Traditional methods like drying, smoking, salting, and pickling would all be employed, though the games rarely show these processes explicitly. The presence of general stores selling various foods suggests some infrastructure for food distribution and preservation, but individual families would also need to maintain their own stores of preserved foods to survive the intervals between harvests. The introduction of rice farming in Tears of the Kingdom adds an interesting dimension to Hyrulean agriculture. Rice cultivation requires specific conditions, typically shallow, flooded fields, and represents a more intensive form of agriculture than dry farming of wheat or vegetables. The presence of rice in multiple locations, including around Hateno village, and in marshy areas like the Rubella wetlands, suggests that Hyrulean farmers possess sophisticated irrigation knowledge. The fact that rice is valuable enough to be sold in shops, but can also be harvested by cutting marsh grasses, indicates that both cultivated and wild rice varieties exist in Hyrule. The relationship between agriculture and the broader Hyrulean economy creates interesting dynamics. Farmers produce food that feeds not just themselves, but merchant families, craftspeople, scholars, soldiers, everyone who doesn't farm. This productivity surplus allows for specialized occupations and urban development. However, it also means that farmers operate within market economies where crop prices fluctuate based on supply and demand. A merchant buying produce from a farmer wants to purchase at the lowest possible price to maximize profit when reselling. The farmer naturally wants the highest price to support their family and invest in next season's planting. These negotiations, rarely shown explicitly in the games, would be daily occurrences in functioning Hyrulean villages. The Great Calamity's impact on Hyrulean agriculture was devastating. When Breath of the Wild begins, a century after the catastrophe, much of Hyrule's once productive farmland lies fallow, reclaimed by wilderness or rendered too dangerous to work due to monster presence. The villages that survived, like Hateno and Lurelin, did so partly because they maintained agricultural capacity. Their farms continued producing food, allowing communities to sustain themselves even while cut off from broader trade networks. The fact that these villages could feed themselves meant they could survive, proving that in a post-apocalyptic Hyrule, agricultural capacity literally meant the difference between life and death. The perfumers found in various locations in Tears of the Kingdom represent an interesting agricultural specialization. These individuals cultivate and gather ingredients for perfumes and medical preparations, occupying a niche between farmer, alchemist, and merchant. Their presence suggests that Hyrulean agriculture extends beyond basic food production to include medicinal herbs, aromatic plants, and other specialized crops. This diversification would be crucial for village economies, allowing farmers to produce higher value goods rather than competing solely on basic food commodities. Foraging supplements agricultural production across Hyrule. Wild plants, mushrooms, fruits, and herbs grow throughout the landscape, and knowledgeable villagers gather these to add variety to their diets and supplement farmed foods. The extensive diversity of plant life in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, from spicy peppers in volcanic regions to chill shrooms in cold climates, represents an enormous repository of nutritional resources. However, foraging requires detailed knowledge of plant identification, understanding which plants are safe to eat, which have medicinal properties, and which are poisonous. This knowledge would be carefully preserved and taught within communities. The fact that Uma, the farmer who teaches Link about crop cultivation in Tears of the Kingdom, does so at the village school rather than on her own family farm, suggests interesting things about Hyrulean agricultural society. It implies that farming knowledge is considered important enough to be formally taught to children, not left solely to family transmission. It suggests that communities value agricultural skills and want to ensure all children understand basic food production, perhaps because they've learnt through bitter experience that such knowledge can mean survival during crisis. The spiritual dimension of Hyrulean agriculture shouldn't be overlooked. While games don't explicitly show harvest festivals or ceremonies blessing crops, the presence of goddess statues in every major village suggests that farmers, like other villagers, pray for divine favor. They would certainly pray for adequate rain, for protection from pests and monsters, for bountiful harvests. In a world where goddesses demonstrably exist and magic is real, these prayers might have more than just psychological value. The line between practical farming technique and spiritual practice likely blurs in interesting ways for Hyrulean agriculturalists. The self-sufficiency that agricultural communities must maintain shapes their entire worldview. A village that depends entirely on its own farms for food cannot afford to ignore agricultural production. Every member of the community has a stake in successful harvests, even those who don't farm directly. This creates powerful incentives for cooperation, for sharing resources during difficult times, for collectively defending fields from threats. The agricultural backbone of Hyrulean villages isn't just about food production. It's about the social bonds forged through shared dependence on the land and the cycles of planting and harvest that give structure to life itself. Trade, commerce, and the rupee economy. The economy of Hyrule operates on principles both familiar and fantastical, creating a commercial ecosystem that supports village life while raising intriguing questions about how such a system actually functions. At the heart of this economy sits the rupee, a gemstone-based currency that has served as Hyrule's medium of exchange since time immemorial. These precious stones, colored green, blue, red, purple, silver, and gold, depending on their value, circulate throughout the kingdom, passing from merchant to customer, from employer to employee, from treasure chest to adventurer's wallet. The rupee economy presents immediate practical challenges that anyone who's thought critically about the Zelda series has probably noticed. These aren't coins made of common metal. They're actual gemstones, which in our world would be rare and valuable. Yet in Hyrule, they're common enough to serve as everyday currency, with green rupees worth a single unit found scattered throughout the landscape. According to lore from Skyward Sword, rupees are mined from rupee ore, suggesting that these gemstones, while precious, exist in sufficient quantity to support a currency system. This abundance explains why Hyrulean economies don't suffer the deflation or instability that might occur if currency itself were genuinely scarce. The various denominations of rupees create an interesting economic structure. A green rupee equals 1 unit. A blue rupee equals 5. A red rupee equals 20. A purple rupee equals 50. A silver rupee equals 100. And a gold rupee equals 300. This system provides flexibility for different transaction sizes, from purchasing a single arrow to buying expensive armor or weapons. However, the substantial weight that gemstone currency would entail creates its own problems. A wallet full of rupees would be heavy, particularly for someone carrying hundreds of rupees worth of gems. Perhaps this explains the relatively low carrying capacity that Link experiences throughout various games, and the need to purchase wallet upgrades to carry more currency. Shops form the commercial backbone of Hyrulean village economies. Every major settlement features at least one general store where villagers can purchase essential goods. These establishments sell arrows for hunting and defense, basic healing items, sometimes simple weapons or shields. The shop inventory often reflects local resources and culture. A shop in Goron City offers fireproof elixirs and flamebreaker armor, essential for surviving the volcanic environment. A shop in Rito Village might focus on cold-resistant gear and bow-related items, reflecting the aerial archery traditions of the Rito people. Gerudo town shops sell gems and jewelry, appropriate for a culture that values such items and has access to desert mining operations. The merchants who operate these shops occupy an interesting social position. They serve essential community functions, providing access to goods that villagers need, but cannot produce themselves. Yet they're also motivated by profit, needing to charge enough to support their own families while remaining competitive enough to retain customers. In the relatively small markets of Hyrulean villages, where everyone knows everyone, a merchant's reputation matters enormously. Overcharge consistently, and customers will travel to the next village for better prices. Provide fair value and quality goods, and customer loyalty becomes a valuable asset. Traveling merchants add another dimension to Hyrulean commerce. These individuals brave the monster-infested roads between villages, transporting goods to where they're needed and bringing news from distant settlements. In Breath of the Wild, we encounter various traveling merchants at stables and along roads. Some sell arrows or food, others trade in monster parts or ancient materials. These merchants perform an essential service, connecting isolated villages to broader economic networks. Without them, each settlement would be forced into complete self-sufficiency, unable to obtain goods unavailable in their local region. Beedle represents the most memorable traveling merchant in the series, appearing across multiple games with his distinctive beetle-shaped backpack and cheerful personality. He stations himself at stables and sometimes villages, selling various items to travelers. Beedle's business model is fascinating. He moves between locations on a regular circuit, buying low in areas where items are abundant and selling higher in regions where they're scarce. He also trades, accepting items like beetles in exchange for goods or rupees. This flexibility, currency, barter, or direct trade allows him to do business even with customers who might be short on rupees but possess valuable trade goods. The economics of monster parts creates one of Hyrule's stranger markets. Various merchants and NPCs will purchase monster parts, everything from Bokoblin horns to Lionel hooves. But what do they actually do with these materials? Some are used in cooking or elixir crafting, providing tangible utility. Others might be sold to collectors or used in obscure crafts. The fact that a market exists for monster parts at all suggests that, beyond the heroes who slay monsters, there's an entire economic ecosystem built around processing and utilizing materials from these creatures. Perhaps monster bones are ground for fertilizer. Perhaps horns and fangs are crafted into jewelry or tools. The games rarely show these processes, but they must exist to justify the consistent demand. Kilton, the monster merchant, takes this concept to its extreme. He deals exclusively in monster parts, running a business called the Fang and Bone that operates only at night. Kilton uses a completely different currency, Mon, which can only be obtained by selling monster parts to him. He then sells monster-themed gear, masks, and even the ability to purchase monsters for use in certain activities. Kilton's existence suggests that there's a niche market for monster-related goods, perhaps among collectors, researchers studying monsters, or individuals with peculiar tastes. His eccentric behavior and odd business hours, he's only available at night near major settlements but never in obvious locations, suggests someone operating on the fringes of acceptable commerce. Armor shops, clothing stores, and gear merchants serve essential functions in Hyrulean villages. In a world filled with dangers, proper equipment can mean the difference between life and death. A well-made shield might deflect a guardian's laser. The right armor set can provide resistance to extreme temperatures, allowing travel in regions that would otherwise be fatal. The merchants who sell such items aren't merely making profit. They're providing the tools for survival. This gives their profession a certain gravity that might be absent from equivalent merchants in safer, more stable worlds. The dye shop in Hateno village represents a luxury service, allowing villagers to customize the color of their clothing. This might seem frivolous in a post-apocalyptic setting, but it speaks to a deep human need for personal expression and beauty, even amid hardship. The fact that people will pay rupees to change their clothing colors suggests that Hyrulean economy has developed beyond bare survival to include discretionary spending on aesthetic preferences. This indicates a society with at least some disposable income and leisure time to care about such things. The ancient tech lab economy introduces high-end commerce to Hyrule. Robbie, one of the few surviving Sheikah researchers, runs a lab in Akala, where he creates ancient weapons, shields, and armor using recovered Guardian parts. However, he charges steep prices for these powerful items, despite Link being the hero destined to save Hyrule. His wife Cherry, a sentient ancient oven that's somehow become his spouse, assists in the crafting process. This unusual domestic arrangement aside, the ancient tech lab represents cutting-edge arms manufacturing in Hyrule. The high prices reflect both the rarity of materials and the specialized knowledge required to forge them into usable weapons. Only those with substantial resources can afford the best ancient gear, creating economic stratification even in a post-calamity world. Gerudo Town's jewelry market reveals interesting economic dynamics. The Gerudo culture places high value on gems, both for practical use in equipment enhancement and as luxury goods. Their desert environment provides access to mining operations that produce rubies, sapphires, topaz, and various other gems. However, these gems are also rupees, the standard currency. A ruby is both a valuable trade good and equivalent to specific amounts of currency. This duality creates interesting possibilities for arbitrage, buying gems as merchandise in one location and selling them as currency-equivalent rupees in another, though the games generally don't allow players to exploit such systems extensively. The Wind Waker presents one of the most complex trading sequences in the series, managed through the character Zunari and various traveling merchants scattered across the Great Sea. Link can purchase items from Zunari's shop on Windfall Island, and then trade them to merchants on remote islands for different items, which can then be traded again for other goods or eventually sold back to Zunari for profit. This trading sequence requires careful tracking of what each merchant wants and what they offer, creating a minigame built entirely around understanding supply, demand, and the profit potential in connecting disparate markets. It's a remarkably sophisticated system that rewards players who think like traders rather than just warriors. The economic impact of the Great Calamity cannot be overstated. Before the catastrophe, Hyrule presumably had a thriving, interconnected economy centered on the castle town and radiating outward to various villages and regions. Trade routes connected all the major settlements. Specialized goods could be transported reliably. A merchant class had developed that could make comfortable livings facilitating commerce. Then, Calamity Ganon emerged. Guardians turned against their creators, and the kingdom collapsed. The survivors scattered to distant villages, and the economic networks that had connected them shattered. A century later, in Breath of the Wild, we see a fragmented economy where each surviving village operates with significant autonomy because reliable long-distance trade barely exists. The lack of a central government or banking system in post-Calamity Hyrule creates interesting challenges. How do large transactions work without trusted institutions to mediate them? How do merchants traveling between villages ensure they won't be robbed with no law enforcement to pursue thieves? The answer seems to be a combination of personal reputation, community enforcement of norms, and the simple reality that most people are trying to rebuild and help each other rather than exploit and steal. Impa, as the village elder of Kakariko, holds a position of authority that extends somewhat beyond her own village, but Hyrule lacks any unified commercial law or protection for merchants. Stable economies represent another interesting economic ecosystem. These establishments, scattered across Hyrule in Breath of the Wild, provide lodging, meals, and horseboarding for modest fees. They're independently operated, but share a common architectural style and similar pricing, suggesting they might be part of a franchise or guild. The stable owners and workers maintain these outposts in the wilderness, providing essential services to travelers. Their business model works because enough people travel Hyrule's roads to generate steady custom. Without these travelers, merchants, adventurers, and others with business in distant locations, the stables couldn't survive. Their existence thus reflects an economy with sufficient movement of people and goods to support such infrastructure. The economics of treasure hunting adds another layer to Hyrulean commerce. Treasure chests containing rupees and valuable items are scattered throughout the landscape, in shrines, hidden under rocks, lodged in trees, submerged in water, concealed in every possible location. Professional treasure hunters make their living finding and selling these discoveries. This profession requires skills in exploration, combat to deal with monsters guarding treasure, and knowledge of likely hiding places. It's risky work, and probably most treasure hunters barely break even after accounting for the weapons and equipment they lose or consume in their searches. But for those lucky or skilled enough to find major hauls, treasure hunting can be lucrative. The question of economic inequality in Hyrulean villages is worth considering. Do significant wealth gaps exist between the richest and poorest villagers? The games suggest relatively egalitarian communities where everyone works and most people live in similar circumstances. However, successful merchants likely accumulate more wealth than subsistence farmers. Owners of prime agricultural land probably do better than tenant farmers working marginal plots. Even in relatively egalitarian societies, some stratification typically emerges. The fact that Link can purchase his own house in Hateno village if he gathers enough rupees suggests property ownership and real estate transactions exist, which tends to create wealth disparities, as some can afford property while others cannot. The bizarre phenomenon of rupees appearing when Link cuts grass or breaks pots has long been a series joke, but trying to rationalize it creates interesting economic puzzles. Are people deliberately hiding small amounts of money in vegetation and pottery? Do rupees spontaneously generate in grass as some kind of natural phenomenon? From an in-universe perspective, perhaps there's simply so much currency in circulation, or rupee ore is so abundant, that people treat small denominations almost as trash, leaving green and blue rupees in random places because they're not worth the effort of retrieving. This would explain why no one else seems to bother collecting these small amounts, while Link can accumulate substantial sums by diligently gathering every abandoned rupee. The inn economy deserves special attention. Inns across Hyrule charge 20 rupees for a bed, a remarkably consistent price point. This standardization suggests either an innkeeper's guild setting rates, a cultural expectation about fair pricing for lodging, or simply game design convenience. But 20 rupees for a night's shelter and presumably at least one meal represents significant cost for many villagers. A farmer needing to travel to a distant village on business would need to budget carefully for accommodation costs. For wealthy merchants or treasure hunters, 20 rupees might be trivial. This price point creates a service accessible to middle-class travelers, but potentially prohibitive for the poor. The rupee economy ultimately reveals a society struggling to maintain commercial civilization in the face of existential threats. That shops continue operating, that merchants still travel dangerous roads, that stable owners maintain their outposts, that economic activity persists at all speaks to the resilience of Hyrulean people. They haven't surrendered to despair or descended into pure subsistence existence. They continue trading, buying, selling, accumulating, spending, engaging in all the commercial activities that define functioning societies. This persistence of economic life, amid calamity, is perhaps as heroic in its own way as Link's battles against monsters and demons. Social structure and community bonds. The villages of Hyrule are not merely collections of individuals pursuing their own interests. They are tightly knit communities bound together by necessity, tradition, and genuine affection. Understanding the social structures that organize these settlements reveals how ordinary villagers navigate relationships, establish hierarchies, and create the bonds that allow communities to function despite the threats that constantly surround them. At the most fundamental level, family forms the basic unit of Hyrulean village society. Extended families often live in close proximity, working the same lands or pursuing related occupations. In Lurelin village, we see family units explicitly, parents working while children play or help with age-appropriate tasks. The fact that Kiana in Lurelin struggles to balance childcare, household duties, and cooking reveals the challenges facing Hyrulean parents. Without modern conveniences, childcare, education, feeding, clothing, and protecting children requires enormous time and energy, typically falling most heavily on mothers, though fathers certainly contribute labor to support their families. Elderly villagers occupy special positions within community hierarchies. In Kakariko village, Impa serves as the village elder, a role that confers significant authority. People defer to her wisdom, seek her counsel on important matters, and recognize her leadership even though she holds no formal governmental position. This respect for elders appears consistently across Hyrulean villages. Old men and women who've lived through difficult times, survived wars and calamities, accumulated decades of experience, naturally command authority that younger villagers acknowledge. The elderly serve as living repositories of history and tradition, their memories spanning eras that younger generations know only through stories. Teachers hold particularly important positions in Hyrulean communities. In Hateno Village's school, Simon doesn't just instruct children in reading and arithmetic. He ensures the next generation understands their history, including the traumatic events of the Great Calamity. This educational function is crucial for community continuity. Without teachers to pass on knowledge, skills, and cultural understanding, communities would lose their connection to the past and struggle to maintain the sophisticated practices, agricultural, commercial, religious, that allow civilization to function. Teachers thus serve as bridges between generations, ensuring that hard-won knowledge isn't lost. The role of village leaders varies across different settlements. Some villages, like Kakariko, have clear elder figures. Others, like Hateno, seem to operate more collectively without a single dominant authority. The mayor of Hateno village is mentioned but never seen prominently, suggesting that leadership might be relatively diffuse, or that mayors serve more administrative roles than commanding positions. This variation in governance structures reflects the independence of individual settlements. Without a functioning central government after the calamity, each village developed or maintained whatever social organization worked for their specific circumstances. Gender roles in Hyrulean villages show interesting variations by culture. Hylian villages seem relatively egalitarian, with women and men both engaging in commerce, agriculture, and various occupations. However, certain expectations persist. Women often handle childcare and domestic work, while men more frequently engage in physically dangerous activities like treasure hunting or monster fighting. The Gerudo culture presents a stark exception, a society of exclusively women, where males are forbidden from entering their settlement, except once every 100 years when a male Gerudo is born. This creates unique social dynamics where Gerudo women handle all occupations, including warrior roles, typically male-dominated in other cultures. The Goron society appears to recognize only male members, or at least refers to all members using male pronouns and titles like brother. Whether female Gorons exist but remain unseen or whether Goron reproduction works differently than other races is never explicitly explained. This ambiguity aside, Goron communities demonstrate strong brotherhood bonds, with members supporting each other through both cooperative labor in dangerous mining operations and social connections that bind their communities together. Religious observation provides another layer of social cohesion. Every major village features a goddess statue where villagers can pray to Hylia. These aren't merely decorative features. They represent active sites of worship where people seek divine favor, guidance, and protection. The innkeeper at Kakariko village is noted for always leaving offerings at the goddess statue, even on busy days. This religious observance creates shared rituals and beliefs that unite villagers in common spiritual practice. When everyone in a village worships the same goddess and gathers at the same sacred sites, it creates powerful social bonds and reinforces community identity. Festivals and celebrations, while rarely shown explicitly in most games, certainly must occur in Hyrulean villages. Communities need moments of collective joy, times to celebrate successful harvests, religious holidays, births, marriages, and other significant events. Clocktown in Majora's Mask explicitly features a carnival atmosphere as the town prepares for an annual festival, even while a moon hurtles toward them, threatening apocalyptic destruction. This determination to celebrate despite impending doom reveals something profound about human nature and community bonds. People need festivals, moments of shared happiness that affirm life and community, even when circumstances are dire. The concept of hospitality plays an important role in Hyrulean social structures. Inns welcome travelers, offering food, rest, and safety. Villagers share information with visiting adventurers, warning them of dangers or directing them to opportunities. This hospitality isn't purely altruistic. In a world where monsters dominate the wilderness and settlements are scattered, travelers bring news, trade opportunities, and sometimes assistance against threats. A village that treats travelers poorly would quickly find itself isolated, cut off from information networks and trade routes. Hospitality thus serves both moral imperatives and practical self-interest. The relationship between different races' villages reveals complex social dynamics. Before the calamity, the various races of Hyrule, Hylians, Gorons, Zora, Gerudo, Rito maintained separate communities, but engaged in trade and occasional cooperation. The champions selected to pilot divine beasts came from different races, representing a kingdom-wide effort to unite against common threats. After the calamity, these connections weakened as survival became paramount, but they didn't disappear entirely. Gorons still trade with Hylian villages. Zora remember their connections to the royal family. The Rito maintain some contact with other settlements. These interracial relationships, whether cooperative or occasionally tense, shape the broader social landscape of Hyrule. Gossip and information sharing form essential social glue in Hyrulean villages. In societies without mass media, news travels through conversation. Villagers gather at inns, shops, and public spaces to share what they've heard. A merchant returning from a trading trip brings news of other settlements. A treasure hunter describes ruins they've explored. A farmer reports monster movements near village boundaries. This constant flow of information helps villagers make informed decisions and creates a sense of connection to the broader world beyond their immediate surroundings. Marriage and romantic relationships, while not heavily featured in Zelda games' main plots, certainly exist in Hyrulean villages. We see married couples, families with children, and occasionally witness NPCs pursuing romantic interests. The Anju and Cafe subplot in Majora's Mask provides the most detailed examination of romance in the series, showing a couple preparing for marriage while dealing with a curse that's transformed Cafe into a child. Their determination to marry despite this horrible circumstance, and Link's efforts to help them, demonstrates that love and commitment matter deeply to ordinary villagers, and that community members will support each other's happiness. The treatment of outsiders reveals important aspects of village social structures. Some settlements, like Kakariko village in A Link to the Past, initially regard Link with suspicion when he arrives bearing the supposedly kidnapped Princess Zelda. Others welcome him immediately. These varying responses reflect each community's experiences and current circumstances. A village that suffered recent attacks might be more suspicious of strangers. A settlement accustomed to traders and travelers might be more welcoming. These social dynamics feel authentic, reflecting how real communities often respond to outsiders. Children in Hyrulean villages occupy a special social position. They're simultaneously treasured as the future of the community and integrated into productive labor as they grow old enough to contribute. In Hateno village, we see children playing, attending school, and gradually taking on responsibilities. This childhood experience shapes their understanding of community and their future roles as adults. The games rarely explore childhood in detail, but the presence of children across various villages signals communities thinking about futures, raising next generations who will someday inherit responsibilities currently borne by adults. Conflict resolution within villages must occur through social mechanisms since no formal legal system exists in post-calamity Hyrule. Disputes over property boundaries, trade disagreements, personal conflicts, all must be settled through community mediation, elder judgment, or negotiation between the parties. The absence of visible law enforcement in most villages suggests that social pressure and reputation serve as primary mechanisms for maintaining order. A villager who repeatedly causes problems would face ostracism, exclusion from trade networks, and social isolation, powerful punishments in tight-knit communities. The bond between villagers and their settlements runs deep. These aren't just places where people happen to live. They're homes in the fullest sense, locations tied to family history, personal memory, and community identity. When Lurelin village comes under attack by pirates in Tears of the Kingdom, the villagers don't simply abandon it. They evacuate temporarily, but clearly intend to return, to rebuild, to restore their home. This attachment to place, even when that place is dangerous, reveals the emotional and social significance of villages in Hyrulean culture. The concept of mutual aid appears repeatedly throughout Hyrulean villages. When someone faces difficulties beyond their capacity to handle alone, community members help. They assist with rebuilding after damage, share food during shortages, provide labor for major projects that require multiple workers. This cooperative ethic isn't sentimentality, it's practical necessity. In harsh environments where the next calamity might always be approaching, communities survive through mutual support. A villager who refuses to help neighbors will find themselves alone when they eventually need assistance, a dangerous position in Hyrule. The younger generation's relationship with the older generation's trauma creates interesting social dynamics in post-calamity villages. Those who remember life before the Great Calamity carry memories of a more prosperous, safer Hyrule. Younger villagers, born after the catastrophe, know only the reduced circumstances of the current age. This generational divide in experience shapes their perspectives. Elders might speak of how things used to be, fostering either nostalgia or determination to rebuild. Young people might struggle to imagine that better world or might dream of restoring it. These tensions and connections between generations help drive communities forward, even after terrible losses. The social structures of Hyrulean villages while perhaps romanticized through fantasy aesthetics, reflect real dynamics that help communities survive adversity. The bonds of family, the authority of elders, the cooperation in labor, the shared religious practice, the gossip networks that spread information. All these elements create resilient social fabric that can endure even when political structures collapse and kingdoms fall. In the end, the greatest strength of Hyrulean villages isn't walls or weapons. It's the social connections between villagers who've learned that survival depends on standing together. The shadow of conflict, living through wars and calamities. To be an ordinary villager in Hyrule is to live perpetually in the shadow of catastrophe. Unlike peaceful fantasy realms, where evil is distant or abstract, Hyrule's history is an endless cycle of calm periods shattered by apocalyptic events. Ordinary people in these villages don't have the luxury of ignorance about the dark forces that threaten them. They've lived through wars, survived calamities, and rebuild knowing that another disaster might emerge at any time. This existential reality profoundly shapes village life, creating communities defined as much by trauma and resilience as by any other characteristic. The great calamity that occurred 100 years before Breath of the Wild represents the most devastating event in recent Hyrulean history, and its impact on ordinary villagers can hardly be overstated. When Calamity Ganon emerged from beneath Hyrule Castle, he didn't merely attack the castle itself. His malice spread across the land, corrupting the ancient guardians that were supposed to protect the kingdom and turning them into instruments of destruction. These mechanical horrors swept across Hyrule, their laser beams incinerating anyone in their path. The divine beasts, massive mechanical constructs piloted by champions from each major race, were seized by malice-spawned Blight Ganons that killed the champions and imprisoned their spirits. From the perspective of an ordinary villager, the great calamity must have been incomprehensibly terrifying. Imagine being a farmer in a village near Hyrule Castle, watching the sky darken with malice as an evil that had been sealed for thousands of years broke free. Imagine seeing guardians, machines that had stood dormant for generations or served as protectors, suddenly activate and begin systematically destroying everything. Imagine hearing that the champions, the elite warriors selected to save the kingdom, had been killed. Imagine watching as Hyrule Castle itself became engulfed in malice, with Princess Zelda forced to seal herself inside alongside Calamity Ganon in a desperate attempt to prevent total annihilation. The death toll from the Great Calamity was catastrophic. King Roam and everyone within Hyrule Castle died. The entire population of Hyrule Castle Town, presumably the largest settlement in the kingdom, was wiped out. Many other villages and outposts were destroyed. The exact numbers are never specified, but it's clear that the majority of Hyrule's Hylian population perished within a very short period. For survivors, the trauma of witnessing such wholesale slaughter, often of family members, friends, and neighbors, would have been devastating beyond measure. The immediate aftermath of the calamity ushered in what became known as the Age of Burning Fields. This period was marked by the continued presence of corrupted guardians and monsters across the landscape, making large portions of Hyrule effectively uninhabitable. The survivors scattered to distant villages like Hateno and Lurelin, settlements that were either far enough from the initial devastation to escape destruction, or defensible enough to weather the storm. These communities became isolated from each other, unable to maintain the trade networks and communication systems that had previously connected Hyrule's settlements. For ordinary villagers, this meant facing survival challenges in isolation without support from a central government or easy access to resources from other regions. The blood moon phenomenon added another layer of horror to post-calamity life. Periodically, the moon would glow red, and Calamity Ganon's power would revive all slain monsters. For ordinary villagers, this meant that no amount of effort to clear monsters from an area could create permanent safety. A village might successfully defend against a bokoblin camp, killing every monster, only to have them respawn days later under a blood moon. This endless cycle created a permanent state of siege mentality. Villagers could never truly relax, never feel completely secure, because they knew the threats they'd eliminated would inevitably return. The psychological impact of living under such conditions is difficult to fully comprehend. In the real world, communities affected by war or disaster can eventually rebuild and recover, hoping that the worst is past. Hyrulean villagers had no such hope for most of a century. They knew that Calamity Ganon remained sealed in the castle, constantly working to break free. They knew that when he succeeded, there might not be anyone capable of stopping him. Princess Zelda was gone, holding back the darkness alone. Link, the hero who was supposed to save everyone, had fallen in battle and disappeared. The only reason to continue wasn't optimism about the future, but simply the stubborn determination to survive another day. Different communities experienced the Great Calamity differently, based on their locations and circumstances. Hateno village, positioned in the far southeast of Hyrule, avoided the worst of the initial destruction. Fort Hateno, the ruined structure standing between Hateno and central Hyrule, tells a story of desperate last stands. This fortress, originally a checkpoint for travelers, became a critical defensive position where soldiers fought to prevent corrupted guardians from reaching Hateno. The fort fell, but apparently the defenders bought enough time for Hateno village itself to survive. A century later, villagers in Hateno live with the knowledge that they exist because unknown soldiers sacrificed everything to protect them. Lurelin village, isolated on the southeastern coast, escaped the calamity entirely due to its remote location. While this might seem fortunate, it also meant the village developed separately from other communities during the Age of Burning Fields. Their relative safety came at the cost of even greater isolation, unable to help or receive help from other settlements. The self-sufficient fishing economy that sustained Lurelin through this period became both a strength and a limitation, sufficient for survival, but offering little surplus to support broader reconstruction efforts. The impact on other races varied significantly. The Zora, with their long lifespans, include many individuals who personally remember the Great Calamity, the death of their princess Mipha, and the loss of the champion Link, who many Zora blamed for failing to protect her. This cultural memory of traumatic events shapes Zora society in Breath of the Wild, creating tensions when Link returns with no memory of his past. The Gorons, living in the harsh volcanic environment of Death Mountain, faced attacks from the corrupted divine beast Var Rudania, but managed to endure through their natural durability and the defensible nature of their mountainous home. The Gerudo, protected by the desert that separates them from central Hyrule, suffered less direct devastation, but still lost their champion Urbosa and faced ongoing threats from the corrupted divine beast, Var Naboris. The Rito provide an interesting case study in post-calamity adaptation. The divine beast Var Mado, corrupted after the death of champion Revali, circled the skies around Rito village, creating dangerous conditions for the winged people whose entire culture revolves around flight. Unable to fly safely without risk of being attacked by the divine beast, the Rito were effectively grounded in their own homeland, a violation of their most fundamental freedom. The fact that they endured this situation for a century without abandoning their village demonstrates remarkable resilience and attachment to their home. The absence of central authority after King Rome's death created power vacuums that different communities filled in various ways. Impa, As the last surviving member of Zelda's inner circle and one of the few who knew the full truth about what happened during the calamity, became a default leader of sorts. Her position as Kakariko village elder gave her authority locally, but more broadly, she became a keeper of secrets and a symbol of continuity with the past. Other communities developed their own leaders or governing structures by necessity, having no choice but to make decisions independently. The period between the Great Calamity and Link's awakening saw gradual recovery despite ongoing dangers. Villages slowly rebuilt damaged infrastructure, re-established some trade connections, and developed strategies for surviving in a monster-dominated landscape. Stables were constructed or reopened, providing safe waypoints for travelers brave enough to traverse the roads. Merchants resumed traveling between settlements, though in reduced numbers and with far greater caution. Life continued not because the threat had passed, but because people refused to give up. The memory of better times served both as inspiration and as source of pain for older villagers. Those who remembered Hyrule before the calamity, the bustling castle town, the safe roads, the sense that the kingdom was united and protected, carried that knowledge as both gift and curse. They could tell younger generations about what had been lost, potentially motivating them to help rebuild. But they also had to live with the knowledge of just how far Hyrule had fallen, how much had been destroyed, how many had died. This survivor's burden weighs heavily in the few conversations where older NPCs discuss the past. The preparation for future calamities became part of village culture after such traumatic experiences. Parents teaching children to fight, not for adventure, but for survival. Communities maintaining watch systems to spot approaching monsters. Villages positioned with escape routes planned in case defenses fail. These practical preparations reveal societies that have learned harsh lessons and adapted accordingly. They're not paranoid. They're realistic about the dangers they face and determined not to be caught unprepared again. When Link awakens in Breath of the Wild and begins his quest to defeat Calamity Ganon, ordinary villagers initially have no idea this is happening. From their perspective, life continues as it has for a century. Dangerous, difficult, but survivable if you're careful and lucky. Only gradually, as Link frees the divine beasts and news spreads of a hero fighting to save Hyrule, does hope begin to emerge. For villagers who've lived without hope for so long, this must be both thrilling and terrifying. What if this hero fails like the last one? What if hoping makes the inevitable disappointment worse, yet hope persists because that's what humans do, even after repeated catastrophes? The ultimate defeat of Calamity Ganon at the end of Breath of the Wild marks a turning point for ordinary villagers. The guardian threat diminishes significantly. The divine beasts are freed. The malice that has poisoned the land begins to recede. For the first time in a century, there's genuine reason to believe the worst is over. This doesn't immediately solve all problems. Monsters still exist. Villages still need rebuilding. Crops still need planting. But the existential dread that shadowed every moment of life begins to lift. The future suddenly holds possibilities beyond mere survival. In Tears of the Kingdom, set several years after the defeat of Calamity Ganon, we see Hyrule beginning to recover. Reconstruction efforts are underway. Travel between villages becomes safer. New settlements like Tarry Town grow. Yet the arrival of the upheaval, a new crisis caused by Ganondorf's emergence from beneath Hyrule Castle, demonstrates that the cycle of calamity hasn't ended. For ordinary villagers who thought they'd finally achieved safety, this new threat must be devastating. How many calamities must they survive? How many times must they rebuild? When does it end? The resilience of Hyrulean villagers in the face of repeated catastrophes speaks to something fundamental about the human spirit, or at least the sentient spirit of Hyrule's various races. They don't give up. They don't succumb to despair despite every reason to do so. They continue planting crops, raising children, building homes, maintaining hope that tomorrow might be better than today. This determination, not magical powers or combat skills, represents the true heroism of ordinary villagers. They survive, and in surviving, they ensure that Hyrule itself survives, no matter how many calamities attempt to destroy it. Religion, spirituality, and the goddess. The religious life of Hyrulean villages forms an often overlooked but essential dimension of how ordinary people navigate their world. In a land where gods and goddesses demonstrably exist, where magic is real, where ancient prophecies come true, and champions chosen by destiny rise to battle evil, spirituality isn't an abstract philosophical question. It's a practical concern that shapes daily life, provides comfort in hardship, and offers frameworks for understanding the incomprehensible forces that govern existence. For ordinary villagers who lack magical abilities or heroic destinies, faith in benevolent divine powers serves as both explanation for the inexplicable and source of hope in desperate circumstances. The goddess Hylia stands at the center of Hyrulean religious practice, particularly in the era depicted in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Her worship has been continuous in Hyrule since time immemorial, predating even the establishment of the kingdom itself. Goddess statues, carved stone representations of Hylia, can be found in every major village throughout the land. These aren't forgotten relics or archaeological curiosities. They're active sites of worship where villagers regularly pray, make offerings, and seek divine favor. The innkeeper at Kakariko village is specifically noted for always leaving offerings at the goddess statue, even on the busiest days, demonstrating that religious observance remains important even when practical demands of running an inn create competing time pressures. The design of these goddess statues reflects Hylia's characterization as a benevolent, protective deity. She's depicted with arms outstretched in a welcoming gesture, reminiscent of certain real-world religious statuary. The Kakariko village statue notably wears a red bib, an element borrowed from Japanese Jizo statues, which are believed to protect children, travelers, and pregnant women. This cultural reference suggests that Hyrulean villagers view Hylia similarly, as a guardian figure who watches over the vulnerable and guides those on journeys. Given that ordinary villagers in Hyrule are perpetually vulnerable, and life itself is a perilous journey, this protective aspect of the goddess would naturally resonate deeply. The springs of power, wisdom, and courage scattered across Hyrule serve as more sacred sites of worship. These locations feature large goddess statues positioned over natural springs, creating spaces of profound spiritual significance. While we primarily see these springs through Princess Zelda's pilgrimage to awaken her sealing powers, they clearly hold meaning for ordinary villagers as well. The fact that these remote, often difficult to reach locations maintain goddess statues suggests that people make pilgrimages to pray at these especially holy sites, seeking divine intervention in matters of great importance. A farmer facing drought might journey to a spring to pray for rain. Parents with a sick child might seek divine healing. Warriors preparing for dangerous battles might pray for courage and protection. The Forgotten Temple, located in a canyon in the Hebra region, contains the oldest and largest goddess statue in Hyrule. This massive structure, partially ruined but still standing, speaks to the deep history of Hylia worship. The temple itself is so ancient that its origins are lost to time, yet it endures as a testament to faith that has persisted across countless generations. For villagers aware of this temple's existence, it represents a physical connection to their most distant ancestors, proof that the faith they practice today links them to people who lived in ages past, worshipping the same goddess, seeking the same divine protection. The practical relationship between villagers and the goddess operates on several levels. At the most basic, people pray for divine assistance with daily concerns, successful harvests, protection from monsters, healing from illness, safety for loved ones on journeys. These prayers might seem selfish or mundane, but they reflect the genuine concerns that dominate ordinary lives. A successful harvest might mean the difference between eating well or going hungry. Protection from monsters might mean life or death. Healing might save a child's life. These aren't abstract theological concerns. They're urgent practical needs that desperate people bring before their goddess. The goddess statues also serve a specific mechanical function that Link utilizes trading spirit orbs earned from completing shrines for increased health or stamina. From a lore perspective, this exchange represents Hylia directly empowering Link for his quest. But it also suggests that the goddess actively responds to proven devotion. Link demonstrates his worthiness by completing trials in shrines, and the goddess rewards this dedication with the power to continue his mission. For ordinary villagers observing this relationship, it would reinforce belief that Hylia notices and rewards those who prove themselves through action, not merely words. The Sheikah monks who created the ancient shrines claim to have been blessed with the goddess's sight, able to perceive the chosen hero who would one day arrive to complete their trials. After Link completes a shrine, the monk typically says, "May the goddess smile upon you," a benediction that assumes Hylia's active attention and favor. For Sheikah culture specifically, religious devotion seems deeply integrated with their technological prowess. The ancient Sheikah didn't view their advanced machines as separate from their faith. Rather, they saw themselves as using gifts from the goddess to protect the kingdom she loved. The relationship between Hylia and the royal family of Hyrule adds political dimensions to religious practice. The princesses of Hyrule inherit divine sealing powers from Hylia herself, as Hylia once renounced her divinity to become mortal, founding the royal bloodline. This means that when villagers pray to the goddess and when they show loyalty to Princess Zelda, they're expressing faith in what is essentially the same entity. The royal family thus carries religious legitimacy beyond mere political authority. To serve the princess is to serve the goddess incarnate, giving the monarchy a spiritual foundation that purely secular rulers would lack. However, this close relationship between goddess and monarchy creates theological complications when the royal family fails or falls. After King Roam's death in the Great Calamity, with Princess Zelda sealed in the castle and no functional monarchy remaining, did villagers lose faith in the goddess? The fact that goddess statues remained well maintained and worship continued suggests that faith persisted despite apparent divine abandonment. Perhaps villagers reasoned that the goddess's chosen champion, Link, had survived, and the princess was still holding back Calamity Ganon, proving that divine protection hadn't entirely failed. Or perhaps faith endured simply because people needed something to believe in, and Hylia was all they had. The worship of other deities exists alongside Hylia veneration in certain communities. The Gerudo worship the seven heroines, legendary Gerudo, warriors whose massive statues stand in the desert. While Gerudo Town contains a goddess statue, it's tucked away in a less prominent location, and many Gerudo, especially younger ones, no longer actively practice Hylia worship. This religious diversity suggests that Hyrule isn't a theocracy enforcing uniform belief. Different communities maintain distinct spiritual traditions, even while most Hylians remain devoted to the goddess. The horse god Melania represents another divine entity that villagers might encounter, though far fewer people would be aware of this bizarre deity's existence. Malanya resides in a special spring, capable of resurrecting dead horses for those who make appropriate offerings. The existence of this god suggests a complex divine hierarchy in Hyrule, with Hylia as the primary goddess, but other divine or semi-divine beings managing specific domains. Ordinary villagers might never meet Malanya directly, but rumors of a place where dead horses could be brought back to life would certainly circulate, becoming legend that blends practical information with religious mystery. The absence of explicit priestly classes in most Hyrulean villages is noteworthy. There don't appear to be formal clergy who mediate between villagers and the divine. Instead, religious practice is direct and personal. Individuals approach goddess statues to pray without needing a priest to intercede. This religious accessibility suggests an egalitarian spirituality, where ordinary people can commune directly with the divine without requiring institutional intermediaries. It also places religious knowledge and practice in the hands of families and communities rather than specialized religious authorities. Religious festivals and holy days, while rarely shown in the games, almost certainly exist in Hyrulean culture. Communities need regularly scheduled religious observances to maintain spiritual traditions and provide collective expressions of faith. Harvest festivals to thank the goddess for bountiful crops, solstice celebrations marking seasonal transitions, perhaps annual pilgrimages to major temples or springs, all these would structure the ritual calendar of village life. These observances would serve multiple functions, maintaining connection to the divine, reinforcing community bonds through shared practice, preserving traditions across generations, and providing relief from work routines through sacred time set apart from ordinary days. The relationship between religious faith and practical survival creates interesting tensions for Hyrulean villagers. When you pray for protection from monsters and monsters still attack, when you pray for healing and loved ones still die, when you pray for safety and calamity still comes, how do you maintain faith? Yet faith apparently does persist. Perhaps villagers reason that outcomes would have been even worse without divine protection. Perhaps they believe the goddess works in mysterious ways beyond mortal comprehension. Perhaps faith simply provides psychological comfort valuable in itself, regardless of tangible results. Or perhaps in a world where magic demonstrably exists, and a goddess can be reached through her statues, prayers actually do receive divine attention, even if not always the desired response. The education of children in religious traditions ensures continuity of Hyrulean spirituality. Children growing up in villages would observe their parents praying at goddess statues, would hear stories of Hylia's protection and blessings, would be taught to offer prayers in times of need or gratitude. This enculturation makes religious practice feel natural and necessary, an integral part of being Hyrulean. When these children become adults and face their own hardships, they'll turn to the goddess because that's what they've always seen people do. What they've been taught is appropriate when confronting forces beyond human control. The spiritual resilience that religious faith provides might be its greatest gift to ordinary villagers. When circumstances are dire, when loved ones are lost, when the future looks hopeless, when all rational assessment suggests that tomorrow will be worse than today, faith offers a reason to continue. The goddess hasn't abandoned us. There's a divine plan we can't fully understand. Our suffering has meaning. Better times will come. These beliefs, whether objectively true or not, enable people to endure suffering that might otherwise break them. They provide frameworks for processing tragedy, language for expressing grief, and communities of shared understanding for mutual support. The ultimate proof of divine reality in Hyrule comes when Princess Zelda, the mortal incarnation of Hylia, uses her sealing powers to contain Calamity Ganon for a century, and Link, the goddess' chosen hero, awakens to defeat the evil. For ordinary villagers, these events aren't just historical occurrences, they're theological confirmations. The goddess did protect them. The ancient prophecies were true. Divine intervention saved Hyrule. This validation of faith, after such prolonged suffering, would likely trigger religious revivals, renewed devotion, perhaps even theological developments as people process what they've experienced and witnessed. Architecture, housing, and settlement patterns. The physical structures that shelter Hyrulean villagers reveal profound truths about their lives, values, and relationship with the world around them. Architecture is never merely functional. It reflects culture, history, available resources, environmental challenges, and aesthetic sensibilities. The buildings of Hyrulean villages, from the humblest farmer's cottage to the grandest goddess statue, tell stories of adaptation, resilience, and the stubborn human determination to create beauty and meaning even in harsh circumstances. The most immediately striking feature of Hyrulean village architecture is its debt to medieval European traditions. Kakariko, village in multiple game iterations, features timber-framed houses with thatched or tiled roofs, narrow streets winding between buildings, and a general aesthetic that would feel at home in rural medieval Germany or France. Ocarina of Time's Kakariko was explicitly based on medieval German half-timbered homes after Shigeru Miyamoto traveled to Lower Franconia and spent time in northern Bavaria, drawing architectural inspiration. This European influence extends to the presence of windmills, an iconic feature of medieval European villages used for grinding grain and pumping water. However, Hyrulean architecture isn't purely European. Breath of the Wild's Kakariko village shows heavy Japanese influence, particularly in its thatched roofs, wooden construction techniques, use of torii gates, and the small stone statues representing guardian spirits scattered throughout the village. The architectural inspiration comes specifically from real-world Japanese villages, like Kayabuki no Sato in the Miyama region of Kyoto. These traditional villages feature thatched roof houses built on terraces following natural terrain, creating the same stepped appearance that Kakariko displays. The cultural synthesis of European and Japanese architectural elements creates something distinctly Hyrulean, while remaining aesthetically familiar and comfortable. The practical considerations driving architectural choices in Hyrulean villages are significant. In a pre-industrial society, buildings must be constructed from locally available materials, using techniques that local craftspeople can execute without advanced tools. Timber-framed construction dominates in forested regions where wood is abundant. Stone construction appears more commonly in mountainous areas like Goron settlements or where timber is scarce. Thatch, while requiring regular maintenance and vulnerable to fire, provides excellent insulation and can be produced from locally grown plants. Tile roofs, more expensive and requiring specialized kilns, but far more durable, mark wealthier homes or important public buildings. The size and layout of typical village homes reflect the economics and social structures of Hyrulean society. Most houses are single-story or two-story structures with relatively modest living spaces. Large families might share close quarters with sleeping areas, cooking spaces, and storage, all compressed into limited square footage. Privacy as a modern luxury is likely rare. Extended families probably live in adjacent buildings or even share single structures, creating household units that prioritize collective survival over individual autonomy. The presence of lofts in many buildings provides additional sleeping or storage space without requiring expensive expansion of the building's footprint. The positioning of buildings within villages follows practical logic shaped by geography and defense. Villages typically cluster buildings relatively close together, creating compact settlements that can be defended more easily than sprawling, dispersed development. Public buildings like shops, inns, and goddess statues occupy central locations accessible to all residents. Working buildings like barns, smithies, or storage facilities might be positioned at village edges where their specific requirements, noise, smells, fire risk cause minimal disruption to residences. Wells, essential for water supply, become natural gathering points where neighbors encounter each other during daily routines. Hateno village presents an interesting case study in Hyrulean architecture. Located in a region that avoided the worst of the Great Calamity's destruction, Hateno preserves architectural traditions that were lost elsewhere. The village features well-maintained houses with blue-painted timbers and red tile roofs, creating a cohesive aesthetic that suggests either strong building traditions or actual building codes enforced by community standards. The presence of specialized structures like the Hateno Ancient Tech Lab, the village school, and eventually Link's own house through a side quest demonstrates that even modest villages can support relatively sophisticated building projects beyond basic housing. Lurlin village offers a striking contrast with its tropical coastal architecture. Houses here use palm wood construction with thatched roofs built on raised platforms to protect from flooding and allow air circulation in the humid coastal environment. The integration of palm trees into the village design, with houses sometimes built around existing trees, shows an architecture that works with natural features rather than clearing land entirely. Docks and platforms extending over water allow villagers to moor fishing boats and work on nets, creating living spaces intimately connected to the ocean that sustains the community. The Gerudo approach to architecture demonstrates remarkable adaptation to desert conditions. Gerudo Town is carved partially into the existing bedrock, creating buildings that are essentially subterranean, offering natural insulation from the extreme desert temperatures. Most structures have only a single story visible above ground, with much of the living space below where temperatures remain more moderate. The architectural aesthetic features smooth curves and elaborate decorative elements, with bright colors and intricate patterns creating visual richness. The central fountain, fed by natural springs, becomes not just a water source, but an architectural focal point, organizing the entire settlement around this precious resource. Goron architecture takes minimalism to its extreme. The Goron, capable of eating rocks and tolerating extreme heat, require less shelter than other races. Their buildings often consist of simple rock structures offering shade and wind protection, rather than fully enclosed spaces. The interiors are hot enough to melt ordinary people, with pools of lava used as relaxing baths by the heat-loving Gorons. This architecture perfectly reflects Goron biology and culture, prioritizing different comforts than Hylian settlements, while serving similar social functions of defining community spaces and providing places for commerce, residence, and gathering. Rito Village presents perhaps the most unique architectural solution in Hyrule. Built as a single massive structure rising from a stone outcrop, the village is essentially one giant staircase spiraling upward with platforms branching off at various levels. This vertical architecture makes perfect sense for a race of people who fly. Rito can easily access any level of their village regardless of height, while the interconnected nature of the structure creates a cohesive community where everyone literally shares the same building. The timber and canvas construction creates a relatively lightweight structure that likely sways gently in wind, something that might terrify land-bound races, but would feel natural and comfortable to the aerial Rito. The contrast between pre-calamity and post-calamity architecture reveals how catastrophe shapes building practices. Hyrule Castle and the fortifications like Akala Citadel represent the architecture of power and control, massive stone structures designed to dominate landscapes and project authority. These buildings use Gothic architectural elements like flying buttresses and pointed arches, creating imposing silhouettes visible for miles. Their construction required enormous resources and specialized craftspeople, representing centuries of accumulated wealth and power. After the calamity destroyed this architectural tradition, surviving villages developed or maintained more modest building styles, appropriate to their reduced circumstances and resources. The stables scattered across Hyrule represent another architectural approach shaped by function. These structures use canvas and felt stretched over wooden frames, creating semi-permanent buildings that recall nomadic architectural traditions like yurts or tipis. The innkeepers who run stables wear distinctive hats featuring horsehair decorations, and their entire lifestyle seems partially nomadic, maintaining these outposts that serve travelers while living in spaces designed for mobility. The stable's distinctive horsehead shape makes them instantly recognizable from distance, important for travelers seeking shelter. They're positioned strategically along major travel routes, creating a network of safe havens that make long-distance travel possible despite monster threats. The ruins that litter the Hyrulean landscape serve as architectural memorials to loss. The remains of Hyrule Castletown, the collapsed structures scattered across central Hyrule, the destroyed garrison outposts, all these ruined buildings speak of a society that was more developed and sophisticated before the calamity. Villagers living in the shadow of these ruins would see them constantly, physical reminders of how far their civilization has fallen. Yet these ruins also serve practical purposes, providing materials for salvage and hiding places for treasure. The fact that villagers don't seem to mine ruins extensively for building materials suggests either that there's adequate resources elsewhere, or that the ruins hold some sacred character, monuments to the dead that shouldn't be disturbed. The presence of goddess statues as architectural features deserves special attention. These carved stone monuments appear in every village, often in prominent locations like central plazas or high points with sweeping views. Their positioning isn't accidental. Placing goddess statues centrally reinforces Hyrule's importance in village life, making religious observance literally central to community geography. The statues also serve as landmarks, meeting places, and orientation points. Their permanence, carved stone, enduring far longer than wooden houses, creates continuity across generations. A child growing up playing near a goddess statue might someday bring their own children to the same place, maintaining connections that transcend individual lifetimes. The maintenance of buildings reveals community priorities and available resources. In thriving villages like Hateno, buildings appear well maintained with intact roofs, freshly painted wood, and sturdy construction. In more struggling settlements, buildings might show more wear, with repairs deferred because labor and materials must be devoted to more urgent survival needs. The cleanliness and order of village streets, the presence or absence of decorative elements like flowers or paint, the condition of public buildings versus private homes, all these details reveal the economic and social health of communities. The question of who actually constructs buildings in Hyrulean villages connects architecture to economic and social structures. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, we encounter Bolson Construction, a company that builds and renovates homes. Hudson, an employee of this company, eventually establishes Tarrytown, recruiting specialists from various races to build an entirely new settlement. This suggests that professional construction is available in Hyrule, but perhaps expensive. Most ordinary villagers probably build or maintain their own homes with help from family and neighbors, creating structures that are functional, if not always refined. Hiring professional builders like Bolson would be reserved for those wealthy enough to afford such services, or for important public projects where the community pools resources. The future of Hyrulean architecture after Calamity Ganon's defeat is uncertain but hopeful. With reduced monster threats and the beginning of recovery, villages might expand beyond their currently compact footprints. Architectural ambitions might grow as resources become available for more sophisticated projects. Contact between different regions might increase, leading to more architectural cross-pollination. New settlements will need to be built to accommodate population recovery. Yet the architectural traditions developed during the Age of Burning Fields, compact, defensible, resource-efficient, practical, will likely persist because they reflect hard-won wisdom about how to survive in a dangerous world. The buildings of Hyrulean villages are far more than shelter. They're repositories of cultural identity, expressions of values, adaptations to environment, memorials to history, and statements of hope for the future. When a villager builds or maintains a home, they're doing more than keeping rain off their head. They're participating in traditions that extend back countless generations and forward to descendants not yet born. They're creating spaces where life happens, where families grow, where memories form, where human flourishing becomes possible even in the most challenging circumstances. The architecture of Hyrule tells the story of civilization itself, the eternal struggle to create order, beauty, and meaning in a world that constantly threatens to destroy all three. Education, knowledge, and cultural traditions. The preservation and transmission of knowledge across generations represents one of the most critical challenges facing any society, and Hyrulean villages are no exception. In a pre-industrial world, without mass media, printing presses, or institutionalized education systems, how do communities ensure that their accumulated wisdom, technical skills, historical knowledge, and cultural traditions survive? How do they prepare children for adult life in a dangerous world? And how do they maintain connection to their past when that past includes repeated catastrophes that destroy records and kill those who remember? The answers to these questions reveal sophisticated systems of education and knowledge, preservation operating in even modest Hyrulean villages. The village school in Hateno village provides our most explicit look at formal education in Hyrule. Simon serves as the village teacher, instructing children in a small schoolhouse where lessons cover multiple subjects. He teaches history, ensuring that children understand major events like the Great Calamity, not as abstract historical facts, but as traumatic events that shaped their world and killed many of their ancestors. He teaches literacy, the ability to read and write being essential for anyone who hopes to engage with written records, conduct complex commerce, or preserve their own knowledge. He likely teaches basic mathematics, necessary for everything from commerce to construction to agricultural planning. The existence of this school in Hateno village raises interesting questions about education in other settlements. Does every village have a school? Do they employ teachers, or do parents handle education themselves? The fact that Hateno's school seems noteworthy suggests that formal education might be relatively rare, a luxury that villages can only afford when they have sufficient stability and resources to dedicate someone to full-time teaching rather than productive labor. Smaller or poorer villages might rely on informal education, where children learn primarily through observation and participation in adult activities, picking up necessary skills through apprenticeship and family instruction. The curriculum of Hyrulean education would necessarily focus on practical knowledge essential for survival. Children need to learn the agricultural calendar, understanding when to plant and harvest different crops. They need to learn about local monsters and how to avoid or combat them. They need to learn their village's history, its relationship with neighboring settlements, the routes to other communities. and the dangers along those routes. They need to learn the spiritual traditions of their culture, understanding how to pray at goddess statues and participate in religious observances. This practical education ensures that each generation can maintain the basic functions of village life. However, education in Hyrulean villages extends beyond mere practical skills. The side quests involving Simon's school reveal that he's also concerned with teaching about recent history, wanting children to understand what happened during the Great Calamity through primary evidence like photographs. This historical consciousness suggests that Hyrulean educators value understanding the past for its own sake, not merely for practical application. They want children to know where they came from, what their ancestors endured, and how current circumstances came to be. This historical education helps forge communal identity and provides context for understanding why their world is the way it is. The transmission of specialized knowledge follows different patterns than general education. A blacksmith's child might apprentice with their parent, learning metalworking through years of observation and practice. A farmer's children work the fields alongside adults from young ages, absorbing agricultural knowledge through lived experience. A merchant's child accompanies their parent on trading trips, learning the routes, the prices, the negotiation techniques that make commerce possible. This apprenticeship model ensures that specialized skills pass from generation to generation without requiring formal institutions, though it also tends to perpetuate family occupations across generations. Literacy levels in Hyrulean society are difficult to assess from the games alone. Many NPCs can clearly read, evidenced by shop signs, written side quest instructions, and the general presence of written language throughout villages. However, universal literacy is unlikely in a medieval-style society where education is informal and books are rare. Perhaps a significant minority of villagers are literate, concentrated among merchants, scholars, and those in occupations requiring reading and writing. The rest might possess basic literacy or none at all, relying on oral communication and memorization for knowledge acquisition. The preservation of historical knowledge presents enormous challenges in post-calamity Hyrule. When the Great Calamity destroyed Hyrule Castle and Castletown, it presumably destroyed archives, libraries, and records that documented centuries or millennia of history. The survivors, scattered to distant villages, possessed only their memories and whatever documents they'd managed to carry. For ordinary villagers who'd never had access to royal archives anyway, this loss might seem abstract. But for scholars, for those who valued historical knowledge, the destruction of these records represented an almost unquantifiable cultural catastrophe. Centuries of accumulated wisdom, gone in moments. The photographs scattered across Hyrule in Breath of the Wild represent one attempt at preserving historical memory. These images, taken by Pura or others before the calamity using ancient Sheikah technology, provide visual documentation of people and events that would otherwise exist only in fading memory. Link's quest to recover these memories by finding the locations where photographs were taken connects personal history to broader historical preservation. For a society recovering from catastrophe, even a dozen photographs become precious artifacts, evidence of what was lost and what might be rebuilt. Oral traditions play essential roles in knowledge preservation across Hyrulean villages. In the absence of widespread literacy, and with written records scarce, people rely on storytelling to preserve history, pass on practical knowledge, and maintain cultural identity. Elders tell stories of events they witnessed or heard from their own elders. Bards and musicians like Cass travel between villages, performing songs that encode historical events and cultural wisdom. These oral traditions are remarkably resilient, capable of transmitting information across generations through pure memory and repetition, though they're also vulnerable to distortion and loss as details shift in retelling. The cultural traditions maintained by different races reveal knowledge systems specific to their unique circumstances. The Zora, with their long lifespans, possess living memories extending back centuries. A Zora elder in Breath of the Wild might personally remember events from 100 years ago, serving as a walking history book. This gives Zora culture stability and continuity that shorter-lived races struggle to match. The Gorons maintain their own traditions centered around mining, metallurgy, and volcanic living. Their knowledge of Death Mountain's geology and the behaviors of volcanic systems represents specialized wisdom accumulated over countless generations. The Gerudo preserve their matriarchal culture and warrior traditions through careful education of each generation of women, ensuring that their distinctive society persists despite having no male members. The relationship between knowledge and social status creates interesting dynamics in Hyrulean villages. Those who possess specialized knowledge, whether it's agricultural techniques, crafting skills, historical information, or spiritual wisdom, enjoy prestige and influence beyond their economic circumstances. A poor farmer who understands weather patterns and crop selection better than anyone else in the village becomes a valuable community resource. An old woman who remembers events from decades past and can explain how current problems were solved in the past serves as advisor to younger generations. Knowledge thus provides a path to respect and influence separate from wealth or political power. The loss of technological knowledge after the Shaker were banished represents one of Hyrule's greatest cultural tragedies. The ancient Shaker possessed sophisticated understanding of mechanics, energy systems, and even artificial intelligence, allowing them to create guardians, divine beasts, and countless other advanced machines. When the king feared their power and exiled them, the Shaker mostly abandoned their technology and adopted simpler lifestyles. The knowledge needed to create and maintain their most advanced inventions was lost over generations. Only a few individuals, like Robbie and Pura, maintained enough understanding to work with ancient technology that they excavated. This loss demonstrates how quickly advanced knowledge can disappear when it's not actively preserved and taught. The recovery of Shaker technology after it's excavated reveals the challenges of understanding ancient knowledge without continuous transmission. Zelda, Robbie, Pura, and others study the unearthed machines, attempting to reverse engineer their functions and restore them to operation. This archaeological approach to knowledge recovery requires brilliant deductive reasoning and experimental investigation. They must essentially recreate understanding that was once common among their ancestors but has been completely lost. The difficulty they encounter underscores how much easier it is to preserve knowledge continuously than to recover it once lost. The role of libraries and written records in knowledge preservation appears limited in post-Calamity Hyrule. We see relatively few books in most villages, suggesting that printed or written materials are rare and precious. Perhaps paper is expensive to produce. Perhaps literacy is uncommon enough that market for books is limited. Perhaps the calamity destroyed most written records, and survivors haven't had resources to recreate extensive libraries. Whatever the reasons, the scarcity of written materials places even greater importance on oral traditions and direct instruction for knowledge transmission. The few books that do exist, likely family treasures or village archives, would be carefully preserved and consulted for important decisions. Musical traditions serve knowledge, preservation functions beyond mere entertainment. Songs can encode information in memorable forms that survive oral transmission better than prose recitation. The Ballad of the Goddess, Zelda's Lullaby, And various other recurring musical themes throughout the series aren't just pretty melodies. They're cultural artifacts carrying historical and spiritual significance. A mother singing a lullaby to her child might be transmitting a musical pattern that's survived for centuries or millennia, connecting that child to ancestors separated by unimaginable spans of time. The fact that specific songs can trigger magical effects or open ancient doorways suggests that some music preserves functional knowledge, not merely cultural memory. The education of heroes presents unique challenges beyond the education of ordinary villagers. Link, in most iterations, receives training in swordsmanship and combat skills, befitting a chosen champion. This education presumably occurs in addition to whatever general knowledge he acquires. The existence of training grounds, combat tutors, and various masters who teach special techniques suggests that martial education follows its own specialized path. For ordinary villagers who might need to defend themselves but aren't destined heroes, learning basic combat skills probably happens informally, picking up sword techniques from village militia members or learning archery for hunting that doubles as combat training. The preservation of cultural traditions through festivals, rituals, and observances ensures that communities maintain identity across generations. While the games rarely show these events, they clearly occur. Clocktown in Majora's Mask explicitly features a carnival, complete with performances, contests, and community gatherings. These celebrations serve multiple educational functions, teaching cultural practices to children, reinforcing community bonds, marking important seasonal or historical events, and providing relief from daily hardships. A child participating in a harvest festival learns about the agricultural cycle while enjoying the immediate pleasure of celebration, effectively being educated through experience rather than formal instruction. The question of how Hyrulean society will educate future generations after Calamity Ganon's defeat raises interesting possibilities. With relative peace established, resources that were devoted to survival might now support expanded education. Villages might establish more schools. Literacy rates might increase. Historical research might recover lost knowledge from ruins. Inter-village communication might allow knowledge sharing that was impossible during the Age of Burning Fields. Young people might have opportunities to pursue education beyond what's strictly necessary for survival, studying history, art, music, or scholarship for its own sake rather than immediate practical application. The recovery of Hyrule could be measured not just in buildings rebuilt or monsters defeated, but in the renaissance of learning and knowledge that follows security. Regional variations, different villages, across Hyrule's eras. Hyrule is not a monolithic culture or environment. The kingdom encompasses diverse regions with dramatically different climates, resources, dangers, and populations. From the volcanic heat of Death Mountain to the frozen peaks of Hebra, from the tropical coast of Faron to the desert expanses of Gerudo, the variations in geography create corresponding variations in how villages develop and how daily life unfolds for their inhabitants. Understanding these regional differences reveals the remarkable adaptability of Hyrulean people and the various races who've learned to thrive in nearly every conceivable environment within the kingdom. Kakariko Village serves as perhaps the most iconic and consistently featured settlement across multiple Zelda games, yet it manifests differently in each iteration. In A Link to the Past, Kakariko appears as a simple village with some shops and homes, providing respite for Link during his quest. The villagers here have suffered under the influence of Agahnim and the Dark World, living in fear and suspicion. In Ocarina of Time, Kakariko Village has grown to become a substantial settlement featuring multiple shops, a bustling marketplace, and serving as the gateway to Death Mountain and the Shadow Temple. The village has a windmill, a graveyard with hidden secrets, and is presented as a place where the Shaika tribe settles after serving the royal family. Twilight Princess presents yet another interpretation, with Kakariko as a rustic village suffering from strange ailments, and serving as the site of a spring dedicated to the light spirit Eldine. Breath of the Wild's Kakariko village represents perhaps the most fully realized version. A holy Shaker settlement positioned at the base of mountains and accessible only via winding paths. The architecture reflects Japanese influence with thatched roofs and traditional design elements. The village maintains ancient Shaker traditions, with Impa serving as village elder and keeper of historical knowledge about the Great Calamity. The presence of the shadow assassin Yiga clan compound nearby adds constant danger, though the main village remains peaceful. Shops sell Shaker-specific items, including stealth gear and ancient materials. The cemetery on the village outskirts contains graves for countless Shaker, including a massive monument commemorating those who died in the Great Calamity. This version of Kakariko feels ancient, traditional, dedicated to preserving Shaker culture in a world where that culture was nearly eradicated. The transition from Breath of the Wild's Kakariko to Tears of the Kingdom's version shows how villages evolve, even over relatively short time spans. In Tears of the Kingdom, Kakariko has suffered a population decline as younger residents leave for opportunities elsewhere, particularly the new settlement of Tarrytown. This demographic shift creates tension between Impa, who maintains traditional values and wants young people to stay, and the youth who seek opportunities beyond their ancestral village. This generational conflict reflects real challenges facing traditional communities in modernizing worlds, rendered here in fantasy context. The village that was once a thriving center of Sheikah culture risks becoming a hollow shell maintained primarily by elderly residents with fewer young people to carry traditions forward. Hateno village presents a contrasting example of stability and modest prosperity. Located in the far southeast of Hyrule, Hateno avoided the worst devastations of the Great Calamity. Its relatively intact state makes it one of the larger and more prosperous settlements in post-calamity Hyrule. The village features extensive farmland, suggesting agricultural surplus beyond subsistence needs. Multiple shops serve both locals and visitors. The presence of the Hateno Ancient Tech Lab, where Pura conducts research, adds an element of scholarship to what might otherwise be a purely agricultural community. The village school reflects a community that values education and thinks about the future. Link can even purchase a house here, becoming a property owner and village resident rather than merely a visitor. Hateno's architectural consistency, with buildings featuring similar color schemes and construction styles, suggests either strong building traditions or actual regulations about how structures should appear. This aesthetic unity creates a cohesive village identity and might reflect community standards about maintaining certain appearances. The mayor's existence, though the character is barely present, indicates some form of local government beyond the informal elder leadership seen in other villages. Overall, Hateno represents what an ordinary Hyrulean village might look like when it's had reasonable stability and security sufficient to develop beyond mere survival. Lurelin village offers a glimpse into coastal Hyrulean life, a fishing community where nearly everyone's livelihood connects to the ocean. The village architecture adapts to the tropical coastal environment with open-air structures, palm-wood construction, and buildings positioned to catch breezes and avoid flooding. The presence of docks, boats, and fishing nets everywhere emphasizes the community's total dependence on the sea. Villagers speak of fishing spots, catches, and ocean conditions with the intimate knowledge of people whose survival requires understanding their environment. The general store here sells more seafood and coastal ingredients than inland villages would stock. The minigame, allowing Link to participate in fishing contests, reveals that skilled fishing is a point of pride and competition within the community. The peace and isolation that characterize Lurelin also create vulnerabilities. In Tears of the Kingdom, pirates attack and occupy the village, forcing residents to evacuate. This crisis demonstrates that even seemingly idyllic villages face constant threats. The pirates presumably targeted Lurelin specifically because its isolation makes it defensible once seized, and because its fishing operations provide valuable resources. The fact that villagers flee rather than fight suggests a population skilled in fishing but not in combat, unprepared to defend their homes against organized attackers. When Link helps drive out the pirates and rebuild the village, it's a reminder that security in Hyrule is never guaranteed, and that ordinary people rely on heroes or their own community cooperation to survive threats. Goron City occupies a unique ecological niche in the volcanic environment of Death Mountain. The extreme heat that would kill Hylians or other races is comfortable for Gorons, who evolved or adapted to thrive in such conditions. The architecture here is minimal by Hylian standards, with simple rock structures providing shade and wind protection, but little environmental isolation since Gorons don't need protection from heat. Pools of lava serve as recreational bathing areas. The economy centers entirely around mining and metallurgy, with Gorons extracting precious ores from volcanic deposits and forging them into valuable items for trade. The Goron social structure emphasizes brotherhood and cooperation. Gorons consistently refer to each other and even non-Gorons as brother, suggesting a culture that downplays individual status in favor of collective identity. This makes sense in mining operations where cooperative labor is essential, and individual life depends on teammates. The Goron boss, typically the largest and strongest member of the community, leads through physical prowess and the respect that generates. However, Goron leadership seems relatively informal, more like a respected elder guiding a family than a formal political authority ruling subjects. The unique challenges facing Goron City include maintaining livable conditions when Death Mountain becomes too volatile. In Breath of the Wild, the divine beast Vah Rudania's corruption creates such intense heat and danger that normal Goron operations are disrupted. Miners cannot work safely, and the village faces potential destruction if the situation continues. This demonstrates that even races adapted to extreme environments have limits and can be threatened by natural forces beyond their control. The fact that Goron City endures, continuously inhabited for presumably thousands of years, testifies to Goron resilience and their thorough understanding of Death Mountain's volcanic cycles. Zora's Domain represents perhaps the most architecturally impressive city in Hyrule, a place where engineering and aesthetics combine to create something magnificent. Built into and carved from living rock around natural waterfalls and pools, Zora's Domain uses water itself as a structural and design element. The constant sound of flowing water, the shimmer of light reflecting off pools, the organic curves of architecture that blend seamlessly with natural formations, all create an environment of elegance that reflects Zora culture. The Zora clearly value beauty and craftsmanship, creating a city that serves not just functional needs, but aesthetic and spiritual ones. The political structure of Zora society differs notably from Hyrulean village governance. The Zora have actual monarchy with the royal family, maintaining power across generations. King Dorephan rules in Breath of the Wild, with his daughter Mipha having been the Zora champion before her death in the Calamity. This formal political hierarchy creates a more structured society than the relatively egalitarian village structures seen in Hylian settlements. The presence of throne rooms, formal ceremonies, and clear distinctions between royalty and common Zora creates a sophistication uncommon in most of Hyrule's surviving settlements. The long lifespans of Zora profoundly affect their culture and knowledge preservation. Many Zora in Breath of the Wild personally remember events from a century past, including the Great Calamity itself. This creates a society where historical memory is living memory, where the past isn't abstract but personally experienced by many current residents. However, it also means that trauma and grief persist far longer for Zora than for shorter-lived races. A Hylian who lost a child might grieve for decades before death brings its own release. A Zora losing a child might grieve for centuries. This temporal difference shapes Zora personality and culture in ways difficult for short-lived races to fully comprehend. Gerudo Town presents the most unusual social experiment in Hyrule, a thriving city inhabited exclusively by women who forbid men from entering under penalty of imprisonment. This policy creates fascinating cultural dynamics and practical challenges. How does a society reproduce with no male members? The game provides the answer. Gerudo women must leave their city to find Hylian men as partners, then return pregnant to give birth to daughters. Male Gerudo are born only once every 100 years, with Ganondorf being the most notable example, and the reason the Gerudo have such stringent policies about men. The architecture of Gerudo Town adapts brilliantly to the desert environment. Buildings are carved partially underground to escape extreme temperatures. The central fountain provides precious water in the arid landscape. The walls protect against sandstorms while allowing air circulation. The bright colors and decorative elements create visual richness that contrasts with the surrounding desert's monotones. The palace dominates the town architecturally and politically, seat of the Gerudo chief, who rules with authority exceeding most village leaders in Hyrule. The training ground, where Gerudo practice warrior skills, emphasizes their martial culture. The Gerudo economy revolves around gems mining in the surrounding desert and trading these precious stones. The jewelry shops in Gerudo Town do brisk business. The Gerudo also maintain a tradition of exceptional warriors, with some Gerudo serving as elite guards or soldiers. This martial prowess combined with gem wealth makes Gerudo Town relatively prosperous despite the harsh environment. However, the isolation created by the desert and the male exclusion policy limits Gerudo interaction with other Hyrulean communities, creating a society that's simultaneously part of Hyrule and distinctly separate. Rito Village, perched on a natural stone pillar and organized as one giant multi-level structure, represents perfect adaptation to the needs of a flying race. The open-air design allows Rito to fly in and out freely. The spiral architecture provides access to different levels through both stairs for ground movement and open spaces for aerial approaches. Landing platforms at various heights serve as porches or gathering spaces. The village sits in the Hebra region's snowy climate, but the Rito's natural cold resistance makes this environment comfortable for them, while creating challenges for visiting non-Rito. The Rito culture emphasizes archery and aerial skills, with young Rito undergoing training to master flight and combat. The flight range outside the village provides space for practice. The emphasis on individual skill and achievement contrasts somewhat with the more collectivist Goron culture. Rito society values excellence, remembering fallen champion Revali as a legend, while also noting his pride and boastfulness. This suggests a culture that respects ability and accomplishment, perhaps because flying and archery skills directly determine success in Rito life. The various iterations of Clocktown across Majora's Mask's 3-day cycle provide the most detailed examination of a single settlement's daily operations in any Zelda game. Clocktown functions as a small city with distinct districts: the shopping district with its bazaars, the residential district where citizens live, the laundry pool where workers clean clothes, and the clock tower that dominates the central plaza. Every NPC follows a precise schedule, going to work, visiting shops, meeting friends, attending to errands. Watching this town over the 3 days, as the moon draws closer and citizens gradually panic, provides deep insight into how communities react to imminent apocalypse. Some flee, some remain in denial, some seek comfort in routine. All very human responses rendered in fantasy context. The regional variations across Hyrulean villages demonstrate that while certain universal challenges face all communities, security, food production, social cohesion, trade, the specific manifestations of these challenges vary enormously based on environment, culture, and history. A Goron miner's daily life shares almost nothing with a Lurelin fisherman's experience. A Gerudo warrior's training differs completely from a Rito archer's practice. Yet all are people of Hyrule, connected through networks of trade, shared threats from Calamity Ganon, and ultimate loyalty to the kingdom. These diverse communities create a rich cultural landscape that makes Hyrule feel like a genuine world rather than a simple backdrop for adventure. The resilience of Hyrulean villagers. After examining the myriad challenges facing ordinary people in Hyrule, from monster attacks to economic uncertainties, from calamities that destroy civilizations to the daily grind of agricultural labor in a pre-industrial society, one quality emerges as perhaps the most defining characteristic of Hyrulean villagers: resilience. These are people who refuse to be destroyed by circumstances that would shatter less determined souls. They are survivors, rebuilders, believers in better futures, despite all evidence suggesting that tomorrow will bring only fresh disasters. Consider what ordinary villagers in Breath of the Wild have endured. A century ago, they witnessed their kingdom collapse, their king die, most of their population slaughtered, their hero fall, and their princess forced to seal herself with the evil she was trying to destroy. The survivors scattered to distant villages and somehow maintained their communities for 100 years, while monsters dominated the landscape. Corrupted guardians patrolled the ruins, and blood moons endlessly revived slain enemies. Every single day for a century required choosing to continue rather than surrender to despair. Yet when Link awakens and explores these villages, he doesn't find broken populations huddled in terror. He finds functioning communities. Farmers still tend their crops. Merchants still operate their shops. Children still play in village streets. Villagers still gather at inns to share stories. People still fall in love, marry, raise families, plan futures. This determination to live normal lives despite extraordinary circumstances represents a form of heroism, distinct from but no less significant than Link's monster-slaying prowess. The psychological resilience required to maintain hope across generations who've never known peace is staggering. Parents in post-Calamity Hyrule raise children in a world where danger is constant, where their most fundamental responsibility, keeping children safe, cannot be fully guaranteed. These parents must somehow instill in their children the skills needed to survive monster-dominated wilderness while also teaching them to hope, to dream, to believe that life offers more than mere survival. They must balance realistic assessment of dangers with maintaining the psychological health necessary for their children to thrive rather than merely endure. The elderly villagers who remember life before the Great Calamity carry unique burdens. They alone can compare the current diminished circumstances to how things used to be. They remember when trade routes were safe, when Hyrule Castle Town bustled with activity, when the kingdom felt secure under royal protection. Living with those memories while witnessing the catastrophe's aftermath must be painful beyond description. Yet many of these elders serve as leaders and wisdom sources for younger generations, using their memories not as excuse for bitterness, but as fuel for determination to rebuild. The rebuilding efforts themselves represent sustained acts of hope. Every time a villager repairs a damaged building, every time someone plants crops knowing monsters might destroy them, every time a merchant risks traveling dangerous roads, every time parents bring children into this world, they're betting on a future where their efforts will matter. They're refusing to accept permanent defeat. This forward-looking orientation, this refusal to be defined by trauma, even while acknowledging its reality, characterizes resilient individuals and communities throughout history. The social resilience of Hyrulean villages also deserves recognition. These communities didn't fracture into warring factions fighting over scarce resources. They didn't descend into anarchy or embrace brutality as survival strategy. They maintained social bonds, continued practicing hospitality, preserved their cultural traditions and spiritual practices, and looked after each other. This social cohesion in the face of civilizational collapse suggests either exceptional cultural values or leaders who successfully guided their communities through darkness without sacrificing their humanity. The beginning of recovery after Calamity Ganon's defeat offers opportunities for villages to expand and improve, but it also presents new challenges. Communities that develop survival strategies for a monster-dominated world must now adapt to increased safety and opportunity. Young people who might have stayed in their ancestral villages out of necessity or fear can now leave to seek opportunities elsewhere. This creates the population decline we see affecting Kakariko village in Tears of the Kingdom. The skills that served villagers well during the Age of Burning Fields, caution, self-sufficiency, defensive thinking, might need to evolve to suit a recovering kingdom. The next generation of Hyrulean villagers will face different challenges than their parents and grandparents endured. They'll need to rebuild infrastructure, re-establish broader trade networks, recreate institutions that were lost, and perhaps most importantly, figure out how to prosper rather than merely survive. They'll need to transition from a siege mentality to a growth orientation. This psychological and cultural shift will likely be difficult, as trauma responses that help their ancestors survive can become maladaptive in safer circumstances. Yet if history is any guide, Hyrulean people will adapt as they always have. The inspiration we can draw from fictional Hyrulean villages applies to real-world challenges. In our world too, people face overwhelming circumstances. War, disaster, disease, economic collapse, environmental catastrophe. Like Hyrulean villagers, real people somehow find the strength to continue, to rebuild, to maintain hope when all rational assessment suggests hopelessness. The resilience of ordinary Hyrulean villagers reminds us that human beings possess remarkable capacities for endurance and adaptation, that ordinary people can be extraordinary when circumstances demand it, and that civilization itself is a collective act of hope sustained across generations. Conclusion. We began this exploration by asking what life is really like for ordinary villagers in Hyrule, those who don't bear destiny's burden or wield legendary weapons. We've journeyed through their daily routines, agricultural practices, economic systems, social structures, religious beliefs, architectural traditions, educational methods, and the varied manifestations of village life across different regions. We've witnessed how these communities survive calamities that destroy kingdoms, and how they maintain civilization even when every rational basis for hope disappears. The answer to our original question is complex and multifaceted. Life for ordinary Hyrulean villagers is difficult, dangerous, and often tragic. It's marked by constant awareness of threats, by loss that accumulates across generations, by hardships that would break many. Yet it's also characterized by community bonds that sustain people through darkness, by practical skills that allow survival against impossible odds, by cultural traditions that give meaning to existence, by faith that provides comfort when circumstances offer none, and above all, by resilience that refuses to accept permanent defeat. These villagers deserve recognition as the true foundation of Hyrule. Link's heroic deeds matter immensely, but they matter because there are people worth saving, communities worth defending, a civilization worth preserving. The farmers who plant crops season after season despite repeated setbacks. The merchants who travel dangerous roads to connect isolated communities. The teachers who ensure younger generations inherit their culture. The parents who raise children against all odds. These ordinary people are heroes in their own right. Their quiet determination makes possible the kingdom that the chosen hero fights to protect. What makes Hyrule feel real? What elevates the Zelda series beyond simple adventure stories is the attention paid to these background details of ordinary life. The villages we visit feel inhabited by actual people rather than props. The shops, inns, farms, and homes feel functional rather than decorative. The NPCs, however limited by game mechanics, still suggest lives that extend beyond their interactions with the player character. This attention to the mundane makes the magical feel meaningful. As you continue your adventures in Hyrule, whether in Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, or any other game in this beloved series, take a moment to appreciate the ordinary villagers you encounter. Talk to them, learn their stories, accept their side quests, purchase goods from their shops. These small interactions acknowledge that they exist, that their lives and concerns matter, that they're more than background decoration in Link's story. They're the reason Link's story matters in the first place. The villagers of Hyrule and their inhabitants remind us that civilization is fragile, that it must be maintained through constant effort, that it can be destroyed much faster than it can be built. But they also remind us that civilization is resilient, that ordinary people possess extraordinary strength, that communities can endure unimaginable hardships and somehow emerge with their humanity intact. These lessons resonate far beyond fantasy gaming, speaking to the real challenges facing our own world and the real people who face them with courage we should honor. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lives of ordinary Hyrulean villagers, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue exploring the rich lore of The Legend of Zelda and other action gaming series. Comment below with your thoughts on village life in Hyrule or any other aspects of Zelda lore you'd like to see covered in future videos. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the daily realities of life in one of gaming's most beloved fantasy kingdoms. Until next time, may the goddess smile upon you